And good afternoon, 3:08 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, October 10th, year 2023. I'm your host, Mark Kulak, and this is a part 7 of the reading of the 2012 What is Biotechnology.org article on Cesar, Milstein, and History of Monoclonal Antibodies. I just do these readings live, and I just do them in one shot. We do have a playlist being built for this series. The playlist can be found, by the way, on YouTube. If you go to Houstonic Live 1, which is the primary account, that's the one where I keep the playlists on for YouTube. You can go there, and it'll play it in order. There's also a playlist on BitChute as well as Odyssey. Unfortunately, Rumble doesn't have playlists just yet. And you can also go to Houstonic.live. If you're ever curious about any playlists, just click on playlists, and they are visually represented there and here because we're at categorizing this, or alphabetizing this, I should say, under the M's. Story of Cesar Milstein, Monoclonal Antibodies. You can just go there, and the covers are there, and you can click and watch it on YouTube, BitChute, Odyssey, and Rumble. This section here is... now I have to click my back buttons here. is titled Monoclonal Antibodies Become a Marketable Product, the first commercialization of monoclonal antibodies. So we're going to skip the commentary and just get right down to business. With a number of requests for cell lines flooding in the Cesar Milstein's laboratory, Milstein and his team soon realized they could not handle the distribution of the cell alone. Help would come from an unexpected source. David Murray, M-U-R-R-A-Y, founder of Seralab, and that's S-E-R-A-L-A-B, a company producing and marketing anti-sera as a research reagent for scientists. Murray had first been alerted to Cesar Milstein's work by a meeting he had with the immunologist Ken Welsh, who was based at Queen Victoria Hospital in East Grinstead, not far away from Crawley Downs in Sussex, where Seralab was located. Murray, and that's David Murray, already had an association with Welsh's department, being a regular supplier of rabbit anti-serum for research purposes to Richard Batchelor, B-A-T-C-H-E-L-O-R, who was Welsh's superior. He also had strong links with the hospital's chief technical officer, Ron Chambers, who helped him found the company Seralab in 1971. One of Murray's first meetings with Welsh was in January of 1977, shortly after the latter learnt of the NRDC's decision not to pursue a patent for George Kohler and Cesar Milstein's technique for producing monoclonal antibodies. At the time, Welsh was in the midst of a series of negotiations with a number of company executives to see if they could help, and he urged Murray to look at the article published by Kohler and Milstein in Nature in August of 1975. Excited by the prospect monoclonal antibodies promised for his own business, Murray immediately wrote to Milstein to find out whether they could collaborate. In February of 1977, shortly after posting his letter, Murray encountered Milstein in person by chance on one of his sales rounds for the company's fetal calf serum, a critical reagent for tissue culture, and that's F-O-E-T-A-L. Knocking on the door of what, unbeknown to him, was Milstein's office, Murray, not recognizing Milstein, launched into a sales pitch for the serum. He was quickly interrupted, however, by Milstein, who withdrew Murray's letter from under his pile of papers. Murray recalled that it was only at that moment that he realized whom he was speaking to. The discussion soon shifted to the headache Milstein was experiencing in meeting the flood of requests for his cell lines. On hearing of Milstein's frustrations, he quickly realized his company could probably help with their distribution. According to Cesar Milstein, although he had been unaware of the commercial potential of monoclonal antibodies, prior to this meeting with Murray, he had given little thought to the practicality of such an endeavor. With what Murray offered him was an arrangement whereby Seralab would distribute the monoclonal antibodies for Milstein at an agreed cost and would return a proportion of the Sera Laboratories' profit on the antibodies to Milstein's laboratory. Attracted by Murray's proposal, Cesar Milstein immediately got in touch with the Medical Research Council, which agreed to the proposal. For Milstein, this meeting with Murray was, as he put it, quote, the starting point at which I started to think more seriously about the commercialization of monoclonal antibodies. In my innocence, I thought if we could do that at the level I was talking about, a minor antibody being distributed by a commercial firm, we might be able to do it on a larger scale with a future, more important monoclonal antibody, unquote. Next little subsection, monoclonal antibodies, a business opportunity. Murray believed that monoclonal antibodies could slot into the already well-established market for anti-sera, that is, blood serum containing antibodies. The antibodies contained in such sera were an important tool in the diagnosis of many diseases. They had been used for diagnostic tests since the late 19th century, based on observations that they could disintegrate or lyse, L-Y-S-E, separate or precipitate, or clump together agglutinate bacteria in a solution. The reaction between an antigen and an antibody also had predictable biochemical reactions. Within this context, the antibodies and the anti-sera could be used as a diagnostic probes to define, isolate, and measure a wide variety of immunological molecules. Interesting. The first anti-serum-based test was the Widal test, W-I-D-A-L, introduced for diagnosing typhoid in 1896. This was to be followed by the Landsteiner test for blood grouping, year 1900, 1901, and the Wassermann test for detecting syphilis in 1906. Over the years, many other tests followed. One of the most important was the Coombs, C-O-O-M-B-S, antiglobulin test developed in 1945, widely used for detecting antibodies that can cause premature red blood cell destruction. The Coombs test is particularly important in blood transfusions and detecting rhesus incompatibility between the blood of mother and fetus. By the 1960s, the use of anti-sera for diagnostics had become widespread in clinics and hospitals, aided in part by the emergence of electrophoresis and labeling techniques using firstly enzymes and then radioisotopes. Some idea of how large the market for anti-sera was can be seen by the fact that Murray believed there to be around 20 major international companies competing in the space, and that many hospitals had specific budgets set aside for the purchase of anti-sera. This, he pointed out, provided a ready market for monoclonal antibodies. According to Murray, monoclonal antibodies offered exciting prospects for routine hospital diagnostics. He argued they offered the chance for more accurate and more replicable results. This is particularly striking because at this stage, Milstein and his colleagues were only just beginning to investigate the practical utility of monoclonal antibodies for diagnostic applications. Nor was everyone at this time convinced that monoclonal antibodies provided any particular advantage over conventional antibodies as diagnostic reagents. For Murray's own serum production business, however, Milstein and Kohler's technique not only opened up the possibility of producing standardized, identical antibodies with known specificity, it also promised to cut down on the labor intensity of the production process. This, in turn, would reduce costs and increase potential profits. A further important advantage Murray ascribed to the new method was the possible reduction in the number of animals needed in the production of antisera. Before Milstein and Kohler developed their technologies, animal-based antiserum could only be made in small quantities, so that large numbers of animals had to be immunized for production, and each batch of antiserum was dependent on the lifetime of a particular animal. Wow, I did not know that. Every time an animal died, other animals had to be tested for another source of antiserum. All of this was time-consuming as well as laborious. Next section, a reciprocal relationship. The contract between Seralab and the MRC took time to be finalized. First drafted in November of 1977, it was only finalized in October of 1978. By the time Seralab was already well underway, let me restart that sentence. By this time, Seralab was already well underway with the commercialization of Milstein's first cell lines. As early as February of 1978, the company included Milstein's myeloma cell line in its marketing catalog alongside the company's other antiserum products. This represented the first commercialization of cell lines for the production of monoclonal antibodies. The number and type of samples from Milstein distributed by Seralab increased over time. Murray also moved quickly to source monoclonal antibodies from other scientists for distribution. Taken as a whole, the relationship between Seralab and Milstein was to their mutual advantage. Milstein's laboratory helped Seralab set up its facilities for the supply of monoclonal antibodies. In return, Seralab sponsored a research scientist to work at the Laboratory of Molecular Biology in Cambridge, England. In addition, Seralab's distribution of the cell lines helped shift some of the burden of distribution Milstein and his team had experienced in the early years. Nonetheless, he was cautious about which cells he was willing to release. He was, for example, reluctant to give Seralab's cell lines with significant commercial potential, like those that would be useful for the purification of interferon. Ooh. Despite this, however, within a short space of time, the company had become the focal point of call for researchers. Robert Tyndall, Tindle, who is the head of research at Seralab from 1984, recalls that the company essentially acted as a clearinghouse, like a news agent, where a customer can buy any newspaper. As early as April of 1979, Seralab was receiving requests daily for the monoclonal antibodies made by Milstein and his colleagues. Seralab's catalog for 1979 listed 22 antibodies, most of them originating from MRC researchers. By 1983, the Seralab catalog listed 68 monoclonal antibodies and many other reagents for making monoclonal antibodies. 3 years later, Seralab's catalog list had grown to 221 monoclonal antibodies. At that time, the company had one of the most extensive collections of monoclonal antibodies then in existence. Researchers could buy such monoclonal antibodies either in purified form or as acetites or supernatant. Production conformed to the United States Federal Drug Administration good manufacturing practice standards, where monoclonal antibodies were supplied in large volume. Next section is called Competitors Enter the Space. Despite its being at the forefront of commercializing monoclonal antibodies, Serolab was largely overlooked by the British government and policymakers eager to make up for the lost opportunity of patenting the technology. Its existence was ignored, for instance, in the publicity surrounding the establishment of Celltech, Celltech, which was a British biotechnology company founded to exploit British innovations such as monoclonal antibodies. Unlike Serolab, which had been built up on a bootstrap basis, Celltech was founded with government backing and $12 million in venture capital, which was a little bit more at that time than it is now. Murray was highly critical of the way his company's pioneering role in the commercialization of monoclonal antibodies went unrecognized. From his perspective, the company had laid an important foundation for the industrial development of the technology, which the company promoted not only as reagents for laboratory use, but also for the development of diagnostics. He expressed his feelings in a letter that he sent to Cesar Milstein in July of 1980 and copied it to Sir Keith Joseph, who was the conservative minister then involved in trying to protect British interests in biotechnology, probably associated with Margaret Thatcher. That's the narrator's thought. In it, he pointed out that Serolab was a British company exploiting a British invention and therefore deserved government support. Its failure to do so was particularly striking given the government's concern over the failure of the National Research Development Corporation, the NRDC, to patent the technique, which it blamed on the slowness of British companies to commercialize biotechnology. Serolab was one of several companies that Milstein and the MRC engaged to distribute the cell lines from the Laboratory of Molecular Biology. One of the companies that they also worked with was Flow Laboratories, F-L-O-W, Flow Laboratories in Scotland, a supplier of cells, media, and sera. It was a subsidiary of Flow General Incorporated, which is an American company founded by Michael Wall, W-A-L-L, who would later help establish Centocor in 1979, one of the first American companies to commercialize monoclonal antibodies for diagnostics and therapeutics. I have to reread that paragraph. That is, Serolab was one of several companies that Cesar Milstein and the MRC engaged to distribute the cell lines from the Laboratory of Molecular Biology. One of the companies they also worked with was Flow Laboratories in Scotland, a supplier of cells, media, and sera. It was a subsidiary of Flow General Inc., an American company founded by Michael Wall, who would later help establish Centocor in 1979, one of the first American companies to commercialize monoclonal antibodies for diagnostics and therapeutics. I don't know if this article says it or not. I thought it did. But Centocor was also co-founded by Hilary Kaprowski. That's why we're looking at Centocor. And Centocor is also the company that I believe Les Weinstein was representing in 2010, 2011, and 12, father of Eric and Brett Weinstein. It would be interesting if this long article failed to show that the patents were in a way snarfed by Hilary Kaprowski, by Cesar Milstein, and then later on, cell lines were going to a company, Flow General, which was also a co-founder who's founded by Michael Wall, who also helped establish Centocor. That would mean that it's kind of two paths for Milstein to have provided this information, these cell lines and so on and so forth, to Centocor and the Wistar Institute. At some point, I actually have to wonder, again, this is just narrator's note and speculation, if Cesar Milstein, he was not British, he was from Argentina. This wasn't his home country. Was he really as invested as everyone else? Didn't Hilary Kaprowski, isn't he like one of the luckiest Poles alive? His family just happened to leave Poland like hours before Germany invaded Poland? And didn't Hillary Kaprowski first go to Italy and then go to Brazil for like 4 years and work for the Rockefeller Institute during World War II? I don't know. Just some things to think about. Narrator's note over. Over time, commercial distributors replaced Milstein's laboratory as the main source of cell lines for the making of monoclonal antibodies. This inevitably entailed new financial arrangements. In the early days, Milstein's laboratory had been largely happy to provide cell lines, provided transport costs were paid. But this was to change. With patents at stake and monoclonal antibodies now commercially valuable, new products had to be put in place. Companies expected to be rewarded from the process of distribution, and royalties had to be paid on the cell lines that were now being patented. This inevitably made the transactions more commercial. Researchers were increasingly discouraged from obtaining their cell lines directly from Milstein's laboratory or from passing cell lines between themselves. One of the reasons for the shift was that any exchange between scientists reduced revenue for the companies supplying the cell line, thereby decreasing any royalties that could be passed on to the MRC. Milstein not only distributed his cell lines through commercial channels, he also worked with Melvin Cohn, C-O-H-N, an immunologist based at the Salk Institute in San Diego, to supply cell lines through a cell bank Cohn had set up in the 1970s to serve as a repository for murine immune-related culture and tumor cells, many of which originated from Michael Potter at the National Institutes of Health. It had funding from the National Cancers Institute. Narrator's note: if I have the opportunity to go back and dig in, I suspect we're going to find connections between here, UC Davis, possibly also the special virus cancer program of the 1960s, 1970s. Cohn first received the P3X63AG8 myeloma cell line from Milstein in January of 1977. This cell line was in fact a derivative of one of the myeloma cell lines supplied from Cohn's cell bank and was the fusion partner Georges Kohler and Cesar Milstein had used to produce the hybrid cell line that secreted the first successful monoclonal antibodies. By June of 1977, Cohn reported that he was so inundated with requests for the P3X63AG8 myeloma cell that he wished to advertise it in the catalog of the Salk Institute Cell Bank. For Milstein and his staff, Cohn's offer to distribute the cell line was very helpful. It meant they could now refer scientists based in America to Cohn's laboratory, thereby circumventing the need to negotiate international shipping of the cells and bypassing the need for customs clearance. By 1979, the catalog had 7 hybridomas listed. Over the following years, the Salk Institute would become a major repository for many different monoclonal antibody cell lines. Interesting. And here's a letter from Melvin Cohn at the Salk Institute in San Diego requesting permission to advertise Milstein's P3X63AG8 myeloma cell line. There it is. Okay, the next section is titled Harnessing the Value of Monoclonal Antibodies. This is also a rather long section. We're going to keep breaking it up. Wow, this is a very long section here. We're going to keep breaking it up. We'll probably read this one. It will probably be tomorrow. If I do another video today, it's going to be to highlight a very interesting clip from Sina Bavari at a December in 2014 presentation he did in Japan. Sina Bavari, the previous longtime scientific director of UCAMRID, previous colleague, by the way, collaborator in several instances of Robert Malone. Also potentially a boss 2 levels up from Bruce Ivins. Anyways, in the 2014 presentation in Japan, during the Ebola outbreak, why is he going to Japan to give a talk? Questions right there. But he said that while monoclonal antibodies were very interesting, at least in the case there, they were talking about Ebola, it was very expensive. And he was talking about the interest that he had and other people had in using small molecules, antivirals, something which eventually remdesivir was picked out of. Interesting. So remdesivir is a nice way to be able to, nice, small, inexpensive, small particle, which could be seen as a way to be able to slow down the monoclonal antibody market. Because monoclonal antibodies are just so expensive. And isn't it interesting? Narrator's note, sorry, I'm on a little bit of a rant here, but why is it that you can say monoclonal antibodies are just so expensive? They're so expensive, and they are for darn expensive. But then at the same time, you can say, compared to mRNA, which is being given to people for free. And it's expected that mRNA shots would be costing anywhere between $80 to $150 each, if not for all the government funding of them right now. And the monoclonal antibodies are $900. You think that difference could be made up someday? To me, it sounds like the cost is just an excuse, but it's not the real reason why they're trying to bypass the monoclonals. Anyways, we might do a little bit of discussion about that. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Have a great afternoon. Thank you for your support and being here. Sorry I didn't have any chat windows open. And last minute, I got to put the version on the screen there. Sorry about